Good morning, everybody. Lovely to see you, and welcome for coming to Whitterbury Hall today. And first of all, just to say a big thank you to Tracy and also to Jodie as well, and all the people who've gone to make up this meeting today, which is a wonderful opportunity for us on the health side of things to actually be able to interact with families, patients, carers and others to show where we're trying to go. I'm Timothy Barrett. I'm one of the children's doctors based in Birmingham Children's Hospital, and I've got a large number of our team. We're all working as several different teams in the Wolfram field, and I'll be introducing different members of the team who are here as well, who've given up their time to come along today as we go to introduce you. So what I wanted to do over the next 20 minutes or so is just to talk about what are the possible steps to try and get to some treatment, and I'm going to cover the first step here about how to try and improve health care with the multidisciplinary teams. What we're trying to do to try and slow down the progression of the condition and the timeline of where things have got to, the current trial status, and then related research that's going on as well. So that sounds a lot, but I'll try and go fairly slowly and try and pace it out, hopefully to be okay. Now, first of all, for this slide, I have to say to Stephanie, I have to apologise, but my great friend and mentor Fumi Arano has a lovely slide showing steps to treatment, which you may well be showing later. And I have to acknowledge him as I've adapted it, in our case, to improve. If we're going to improve things, we can start with improving patient care in the clinic. Then we can have a go at trying to slow down the progression of the condition. And then onto Fumi's other parts, trying to protect remaining tissues, and then eventually to try and replace damaged tissues. And the part that we've been trying to do in Birmingham is those first two, and the related research with the help of Snow Foundation and others will be to try and help the third one as well as we're going. So the clinical teams, so starting off with the clinical care, I've put down here for the Children's Hospital, we've got Susan Gleeson, who's here I think. Susan, do you want to wave? Yeah, at the back. He's our Children's Diabetes Specialist Nurse. My colleague Dr. Renica Diaz, who's my consulting colleague, who's waving over there, who leads the clinic with myself on here as well. Professor Raj Gupta in the front row. He's the man who's dressed very tidily with a tie and a jacket on, because he needs shave, which is great. Denise Williams, who's looking very good at the moment. Archana Kulkarni, and then Caitlin Thomas and Mel Bruni at the back. Do you want us to wave as well? Who are research nurses who are supporting the research going on in the clinic. And at University Hospital Birmingham, Dr. Benjamin Wright is a service lead. He's over there as well. He's kindly come for today as well. And then there's other colleagues on here, including Dr. Helen Gleeson and Susan Morgan and others as well, who support the adult service. What we were able to do with the help of the National Health Service England is to set up multidisciplinary team clinics where people could come and see different specialists in one go, rather than separate appointments. We're looking at the service over time, as you're aware. The service started in 2012, and over that time, in the children's service, we've seen about 29 or 30 children and young people over that time who visited the clinic. So that's the sort of the numbers of young people that we've had. We try to see whether there's benefit from these clinics and whether or not we're delivering a reasonable service, and to do that, we try to see how many young people are we identifying diabetes insipidus, water diabetes in. Are we screening for neurological problems to try and pick them up? And are we looking at the age of diagnosis to try and help it to fall? And just to show you where those have gone, for diabetes insipidus, we've asked young people to come and provide a urine sample and a blood test each time they come to try and pick up people who might be benefit for some treatment with it. And you can see over the first blocks of the people that we've done this, about 2/3 of all patients who've come have had the test to try and exclude diabetes insipidus, which has been great. In the second set, about half, and more recently it's been a lower number because we tried to avoid doing extra tests if it's going to make people tired, and avoid doing fasting ones in the morning. That's now dropped off. So what we're going to try and do from the clinics starting in November and other ones is just to ask if people could give us a random urine and a blood test during the day at some point, so that if they would benefit from desmos melts or desmopressin tablets, we can then try and offer those for people to help. The second part was trying to do screening for balance problems, walking problems and gait problems and neurological things. And thanks to Professor Raj Gupta in the Children's Clinic, since the clinic has started, pretty much everybody has been assessed by Raj. Raj, I think you've seen every patient who's come to the clinic over the years as well. And it's been really fantastic to have that expertise. And I think through that, you've been able to add additional treatments where it's been required to help people that we as diabetologists wouldn't know about. And on the imaging and the scans has been really helpful, both to guide current management and also from a research point of view too. So that's helped really well. And then the age of diagnosis part, we wondered whether by setting up a national service we could try and get people diagnosed quicker. And interestingly, the mean age of diagnosis has been really about 9 years of age. It did drop down to about 7, but in the most recent year it's still about 9 years of age. And that may be because to diagnose this, we're looking for people who may have got sugar diabetes and eye problems. And to get the two together, usually under 10 years of age. So that's probably why that's not shifted at the moment. Looking at the glucose level as the last part, looking at diabetes care altogether, and what I can show on there is the overall glucose control for people who've come to the clinic. Whoops, who've come to the clinic. So what you can see is that immediately after diagnosis, there's a big spread of long-term sugar control, but as the years come by, a lot of people just average out very close to the average for our clinic in Birmingham, which is about 8% on here. And it's reassuring to see, I think, that despite problems with vision and being able to read meters and things, young people with diabetes, on the whole, are having as good a control as people with diabetes who don't have Wolfram. So I think that's pleasing to see really from this. What we're trying to do, where we're trying to go forward in the future with Dr. Ben Wright, is include an adult urologist, Mr. Bilal, and I think you found an ophthalmologist who's interested, Susan Mullen, I think, as well, who's very interested in coming to support these clinics too. And we found a way of doing some imaging as part of the clinical trial for adults who come to support as well. We've got to try and get better at doing patient letters faster, and I apologise when sometimes those are slow, but putting together a multidisciplinary letter from lots of different professionals can sometimes take a bit longer time. Involving in more clinical studies, and we're trying to be able to offer as many people with Wolfram the chance to take part in the study as possible, because that's the way we think we can get better care in the future. And we're making sure that the European registry, that many of you take part in, EuroWAB, is included in the European reference networks for rare diseases. And these are new bodies across Europe that have been set up to support all patients with rare disease and bring countries together so that we work together and don't overlap. So that will be with our colleagues in Italy, as well as Germany, Eastern Europe and everywhere else. And even if Brexit happens, that doesn't stop the European reference networks happening, and we'll still be part of those, because with rare diseases we all have to work together on them. So that's that. That takes me then on to EuroWAB, the European Register for Rare Diseases, for which we did get a grant from the European Union, and Caitlin Thomas and Mel Rooney have been the nurses involved in actually helping patients to take part in that. With that study, there are now about 375 people across Europe taking part in it, of whom almost about 190 have Wolfram. So that's way more than any individual country. And that number is still increasing. So it's fantastic, the goodwill of people to take part in this altogether. What it's enabled us to do is to look at the genes and the mistakes in the genes that cause Wolfram. And as part of that, we've been able to publish a paper this year with the whole European consortium describing a database that you can go onto online, for which I've put the website on as well. And if any health professional or parent gets a genetics report saying a number of a gene that doesn't sort of make sense, you can go online onto that website, and then you can look up the reference of that, and you can see what other people have been reported with that same mistake, and see how that might actually link up to the individual. It's got about 300 different gene variants on it for this gene altogether. And as part of it, by bringing so many people together, we've been able to understand the gene a bit better. And one thing that's always puzzled me when I've come to this meeting is that sometimes we have some older people here who don't have diabetes but have got eye problems, or have got diabetes and no eye problems, or who develop the problems in later adulthood. And work done in the lab by Dr. Dewey Astuti, and others there as well, has had a look at a cartoon of the Wolfram protein, and each little filled-in blob is where there's a mistake in the gene for a different person. And the black blobs are mistakes where people will get childhood onset diabetes and eye problems. And some of the red blobs, which are scattered especially down this end, particularly here, seem to be people who just have eye problems and they don't get diabetes. Or they're people who develop things much, much later altogether. So it's been really helpful to try and inform studies, to try and work out how this gene is working, that some people get diabetes and eye problems as a child, and some people don't get them until they're an adult, or even don't get all of it at all. So this has been really, really helpful, and thank you again to everybody who's taken part in this study to make this possible to do that. So that then takes me on to the next part about what can we try and do to slow down progression of the condition and where this has got to in the UK. The overall goal stays the same, that we would like eventually to reverse the disease process and replace damaged tissues and hopefully restore useful vision. But while we're waiting for gene therapy and other therapies to come along, and there are researchers doing that work, can we slow down the progression? And in Birmingham, we've gone down the route of trying to find a medicine that's used for something else that we can repurpose for Wolfram. And to summarise the evidence, we had a PhD student called Sally Garani working in the lab in Birmingham who managed to find a target, something that a drug might work against, part of the cell cycle called P21-CYP. She did a drug screen and found several different medicines that are already used for other things that looks like they might work in this to slow down the problems in the cell that cause Wolfram. She then put it into our cell models of Wolfram, and it did seem to have an effect, a beneficial. It didn't get rid of it completely, but it seemed to help the cells altogether. So at that point, we went to the European Medicines Agency and the FDA in America and got orphan drug status. So this is a recognition that this is a medicine that's got potential for the condition and that we're allowed to do further research on. We then went to our colleagues in Estonia who've got a mouse model of Wolfram and who's given the medicine to mice, and it seems to help their diabetes. And then in collaboration with our colleagues in France, in Genethon, Professor Mark Pashonsky, he's developed stem cells from blood cells. So he's taken a blood sample from a patient, he's taken the white cells out and turned them into stem cells, and then he's differentiated them down into neurons, brain cells. And these are from patients. And those neurons from Wolfram patients behave in an unusual way, and they look a bit different under the microscope as well. But when he's given the medicine to those cells, it seems to correct the differences in those cells compared to healthy ones. So it sort of looked promising as the case. So looking at the timeline where we're at, and I showed this to you last year, Wolfram was first described by Dr. Wolfram in 1938. There were then lots of case reports until 1995, and we described the natural history. In 1998, Professor Alan Permert in St. Louis described the gene, and then in 2005, Professor Fumi Arano in St. Louis found the mechanism. We started the clinical service in 2012, and in 2013 we found a drug target that might work, and then did a drug screen, got orphan drug status, and then in 2017 there's been funding in North America for an early phase trial, which Stephanie's going to talk about, and funding in Europe or UK for what's called a pivotal clinical trial, which Kristian and myself will explain in a bit. So the timeline to try and get a medicine, as I've said, is to find a cause, find a drug target, do studies in cells, do studies in animals, do safety studies in humans, and then do a randomized controlled trial, and then apply for a license to allow you to prescribe it for people. And what we try to do in the UK is bypass these steps and go straight from studies in cells to a pivotal trial because we're using a medicine we already know its safety data and that it works in other conditions already. It's for us to do that. So, the clinical trials team, we've been able to put together this year. Rebecca Story is the Senior Trials Coordinator. Dr. Ben Wright here is the clinical lead for patients in the Queen Elizabeth. And Dr. Renica Diaz is the investigator lead for patients in the Children's Hospital. And the other person here is Kristian Brock. Do you want to wave Kristian as well? Who's our statistician, who knows how to actually check evidence and make sure that it actually is reliable and stands up properly. And he's going to talk about this in a minute as well. And then internationally, we've got Hammer Esteban, who's in Spain, in Almeria, Christophe Olshaud in Paris. Sadly, our colleague Christian Hamel, who was leading this in Montpellier, sadly died earlier on this year, and it's a great loss to the Wolfram community. So we're working now with Benjamin Delprat and others to find another person who can run the trial there. And Wojciech Młynarski is our children's endocrine colleague in Lodz in Poland, who will be supporting the trial there. So what's happened over the last 12 months? This time last year, we got expert opinions from 6 peer reviewers from internationally around the world who looked at the application and the evidence that this medicine might work and gave it very good feedback and gave it the green light to go forward into a clinical trial. In December, the UK Medical Research Council awarded the grant. So this was £2 million. It's an expensive study for a long time to take this forward, to actually do this study internationally. And with Tracy's help and others, we tried to develop a trial logo with the flags of the different countries that are taking part of it. We put the clinical trial team in place. We found someone who could actually manufacture the medicine, and then started the grant on the 1st of March with the appointment of the first members of staff. In April, we went back to the European Medicines Agency to ask advice about how to design the trial, whether it was correct, and they confirmed that they wanted what's called a randomised controlled trial, and Kristian will explain that in a bit as well, in order to get evidence. But, although it has to be randomised controlled, we accept a lower level of evidence because it's such a rare condition. So the trade-off was that we don't have to have gold standard evidence, we just have some indication that it's going to work. We've done the patient information sheets, started tests for medical stability, and then last week I attended a European public hearing about the medicine. So the medicine is called sodium valproate. It's licensed for use in epilepsy, for treatment for that. And we have 2 particular issues with this at the moment that have led to some delays, but we're getting there. One is manufacturing it. It comes as a tablet in a foil package. So some of you might know that when you take tablets, sometimes you pop them out of the foil sometimes. They're in foil packages because they absorb water or moisture from the atmosphere. It is a crushable tablet that you can then crush and give bits if people have difficulty swallowing tablets. But when it's outside the packaging, it absorbs moisture, and this affects its stability in the atmosphere. And the question is it still going to work? So the regulatory bodies have said we've got to check it's stable when it's outside the packages. And that's caused a delay to make sure that we've done those stability tests. And they're ongoing at the moment in Guy's Hospital in London. And they've assured us that they will get some data to us to know that it's stable so we can go forward by the end of this month. The second issue, which some of you may have read in the newspapers, and it was on the news last week, was the European Medicines Agency had a public hearing about this medicine because of concerns of its use in pregnancy. So you may have seen reports. And the reason is, although it's a very safe medicine for epilepsy, it can harm the unborn child if it's given to a woman who's pregnant at that point. And the concern was that there have been women who've taken it who've not known about the risks, and that they've had children who've been affected from this. So the public hearing was to take evidence from people about what they should do and how to increase awareness. And we were able to say that we'd like to use this medicine in a rare disease, and please don't restrict its use too much, because in some rare diseases there may not be any other opportunity or option for this as well. And we were able to give that evidence, and they were taking that into account in their advice. And the outcome is going to be that they're going to increase the health warnings for this, but it emphasises again why we have to do clinical trials in these medicines with all the appropriate safety measures to make sure that we're not causing, first of all, we mustn't cause any harm to anybody, and then we need to check that things work. So the only other thing to add with that we've had is looking at the clinics from North America and from here, is looking at the visual acuity and the progression over time. And this is ages of patients, and this is vision on here. And a vision of 0 here is perfect vision, 20/20, and a vision of 2 up here is vision where you can see light and dark and count fingers, but it's difficult to read letters. And each grey line in here is a line of a patient from St. Louis, and I think it's just St. Louis, this one's not North American here as well. Followed up over several years, looking how the vision slowly gets worse over time, and you can see a lot of variability. Some people get worse faster, some people a bit slower. The lines on here are one particular young person who's had sodium valproate for a different condition, prescribed for a rarer form of epilepsy, nothing to do with Wolfram at all, and measuring the change in the eye over time on the medicine compared to beforehand. And the important thing from the line from these is, with only one patient, it's reassuring to see that the slope of the line is less when on the sodium valproate, suggesting that there may be some slower progression of the eye disease, and at least it's in the right direction. You can't really rely on one person. But the other thing to see is there's a lot of variability in the measurements. And if you do an eye test on somebody who's very, very tired, they're not going to do it as well as somebody who's actually fully rested and fully alert and awake. And it shows us for the clinical trial, we need to do regular eye checks in young people who are, and other people who are not tired at the time when they have it. Otherwise it's going to be very difficult to understand. So, provided we've got the medicine on time, we're hoping to start recruiting in February, start opening up the trial to European sites by midsummer, and complete recruitment by this time next year. There should be some first results by 2020, beginning of 2020, which will tell us at least if there's no point carrying on. I think that's the most important thing. So if within 20 months or so there's no evidence of improvement, then we can stop the study and go on to something else. And the full results for this then should be available about a couple of years or about 18 months after that. If we can show that it has an effect on slowing down the eye condition, then, and the other things are going in the same direction, like the brain and the MRIs, then we can apply for a license and prescribe it for everybody. The final part of this really is just to say what we're trying to do alongside this to support, and this was a joint scientific call for proposals from Stephanie, the Snow Foundation, from Norman Lafloche and the French Association, and the Hope Eye Foundation in Belgium, putting out a call to try and do some research to speed up treatments, and this has been a really, really helpful call to apply for. We put together an application to try and be generalisable for all future trials in the future, not just the one we're doing and the one that Fumi's doing in America. Can we develop some sort of measure to see whether new treatments are effective or not, that we can use across all clinical trials? It might be eyes, it might be a blood test, it might be diabetes control, all sorts of things. And can we develop something that patients care about, that people care about? And then my example is, we thought if we do a scan and measure the brain volume really carefully and show that that is staying the same, that looks like a good measure that the treatment's working. But you probably don't care about what your brain volume is doing, as long as you're feeling better over this. And a patient relevant outcome measure is to try and find out what people want as an outcome from their trial. So the teams are Morgosha and Dewey in our lab, Professor Joja Nagy, who had the whole idea about the treatment concept in the first place, Professor Melanie Calvert in the lab, and Anita Slade, who's here. I did see Anita earlier on. Anita Slade is here. So she's the senior researcher on this project, collecting patient-reported outcomes as well. The Professor Silla in Australia, and the clinical trials unit with Kristian here as well, at that point. So the aim is to aim for the biomarkers to try and collect standardised biosamples in clinic, fresh frozen and sent to the National Biosample Centre, and then use those to do what's called a metabolomic analysis, share the results with all researchers around the world to find out how many different chemical pathways aren't right in Wolfram, and find new targets for new treatments for the future. That's the first bit. And the second bit is patient-reported outcomes, because the European Medicines Agency wants those when we apply for a license. We need to ask you guys, and carers as well, what's most important to you out of the new treatment? And can we find something that's measurable, changes of progression, and changes in response to treatment. So the practical steps are through the Centre for Patient-Reported Outcomes Research, which is based in the University of Birmingham, where Anita is based. And this is to ask for some help with this here. Anita is going to be here with Rose, who's here, I think. Do you want to wave? Who's a third-year medical student who's very kindly given up her lying in bed on a Saturday to come to this meeting. And Ross, fourth-year medical student, who's here as well, is going to help Anita. We're really keen to get your help with a focus group this afternoon for some young people, some older people, and some carers. And even if you may or may not be in a clinical trial or not, it's everybody's help which can contribute to this, to understand what's going to be important to measure in the clinical trial. And this will be to identify these and then actually use these to inform all future clinical trials as well. So please, please do take part in Anita's focus group this afternoon with Rose and Ross. So, I've covered really the timeline, where we are with the steps to treatment, how looking at management is important, and then the supporting steps. And at that point, I'll just put up the acknowledgements and I'll hand over to Kristian, who can perhaps just explain the clinical trial. Thank you.